For this last session, this is going to be more of a conversation. So the challenge is you all are out there, we're up here. So we're going to try and do this in a way to engage you in a conversation about what is next. So yesterday morning, we had Rebecca Ryan, the futurist, give us a high-level perspective of how do we plan for the future and predict disruptions, trends, things that will come our way that we need to react to and be prepared for. So we spent the afternoon, there was a small group of our peers, of solid waste leaders, there was about 50 in the room, where Rebecca walked us through her research. There were 44 trends that she identified that would affect municipalities over the next 20 years. And there was a group of us that walked through those 44 and had some small group discussions to talk about, with regard to the solid waste industry, what's the next, well, this is how I'm describing it, what's the next China that we didn't see coming? On a much larger level than that, how do we prepare as an industry for that? So over the next year, we're going to be having a conversation around, as an industry and with SWANA, preparing leading into the next WASTECON. Here are the 4 trends that rose to the top that we identified as a solid waste industry that are going to impact us, and what do we do about it? So as part of this conversation, we have about 5, 6 that are going to come on stage to report out to you. But this is a conversation, right? We're not telling you this is what we identified, but we want to hear from you. So the production team is going to pull out a couple of microphones to put in the audience, because we want this to be a conversation. You can also use Slido, slido.com. And as we go through what comes to mind to you, we want you to share what you see are trends that could potentially impact the solid waste industry. So, one of the things, I'm checking to make sure that we are ready to go. Fabulous. Okay, I was told to do a little song and dance to give them a chance to mic up. All right, so to introduce our panel that is going to report out to you what we talked about yesterday, we have 6 of our leaders, and they are Scott Bouchie from the city of Mesa, Arizona. We have, you can wait to applaud till they come on. Tom Kutrulis from Orange County Waste and Recycling in California. Ty Marsh from the Solid Waste Authority of Central Ohio. Pat McLaughlin from King County, Washington. Dan Pellowitz from Solid Waste Authority of Palm Beach County in Florida, and Carlton Williams from the city of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. All right, now applause, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so I'm the facilitator of this conversation, and the reason why I am more to the side is they are going to talk to you, and you are going to talk to them. This is a conversation that we are having as we closed WasteCon about what's next. What's on the horizon, and let's talk about this. And so one of the first things that I want to start out with is, as a group, we had an aha moment yesterday afternoon. So I'm holding some example cards. Rebecca gave us 44 different cards and split us up into groups. And the groups had to pull out what were the most high likely to emerge in the next 10 years, and what would be the most high impact that would likely hit our industry. And then on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being low, nothing, high being ready to go, how ready are we as an industry for these 4 trends? And I'm going to kick it to Tom to provide some insight, because we had an aha moment. Tom, what was that aha moment?
You know, as the groups went through their process and we took a look at these items, and they were put up on the scale, it became glaringly obvious that really everything sort of tipped toward the negative side of not being prepared, and everyone ultimately agreed that, you know, we tend to be a more reactive industry. And for some of you, it may not be too much of a surprise, but it was that collective aha moment for us as we took a look at the scale, seeing everything sort of tipping to the negative, that we're basically reactive to these items.
Yeah, they were mostly external factors that we can't control. But just because we can't control them doesn't mean that we shouldn't be thinking about them and be ready for them. And if one of the things this WASTECON has brought to light is the fact of how valuable thinking outside of our bubble, thinking outside of our industry dome, can provide insights about what's coming down the line. So these are the 4 visual cards of the 4 key issues out of the 44 that the group identified that we think as an industry that are going to be high impact, high likelihood, and we're generally not all that prepared for. So the first one is infrastructure overhaul. Carlton, you had some thoughts about that. Tell us.
Sure, thank you. One of the things that the group found that we were severely lacking in terms of infrastructure improvements and upgrades. And this is related to infrastructure overall. The American Society for Civil Engineers rated America's overall infrastructure a D+. When you look at the problems with transportation industry and roadway issues and underfunded mandates that the cities have to deal with, you can see the conditions of our roadways suffering. It does have an impact overall. The American Society for Civil Engineers also categorized solid waste as well. And we want to take a guess and you want to take a shot at what the grade level that they gave the solid waste industry. Close, C+, which is not much better than where we were. And actually it downgraded from where we were 4 years ago, which was a B-. And one of the things that they stated was not because we didn't have capacity, and not because we weren't doing a good job collecting or processing waste. It cited the lack of innovation in technology and improvements in our infrastructure, that our systems are now becoming stagnant and we're not being prepared for the future. So one of the things that the report also highlighted was the issue that you mentioned earlier, was what happened in China. We were faced with some very difficult challenges with the national sword. New contamination standards forced us to make some very tough decisions, especially in the city of Philadelphia. But the bigger issue is that we weren't prepared to deal with the fallout of what happened in China. And it can ultimately happen again. There wasn't infrastructure set up right here in our own country, in America, or other options elsewhere for us to be able to transition that material. So one of the things I think that's very important that we take a look at, how do we invest in infrastructure? The report states it very clearly that going forward, these changes are going to be significant and we need to be prepared for the future.
Excellent, thank you. One of the things that popped on the screen through Slido was, as a key issue, the inability or unwillingness to site new landfills. One could tie that to infrastructure overhaul, the infrastructure of disposal capacity, but also perhaps from a citizen engagement pushback perspective. And so the second key issue that rose out of the group discussion was digital citizens. But we also talked about digital citizens, engaged citizenship, and I know that Dan had some thoughts that he wanted to share about that.
Sure, thank you. I think we're all aware that, that millennials and those coming after them communicate, connect to the world, connect to information in ways that are different than the way most of us were raised. They're much more connected. They're probably less likely to want to sit through a board meeting or a workshop on a solid waste issue, but they do want to be engaged. And so the opportunity, obviously, of technology, the opportunities are great in order for our ability to get information out. But there's a future where I think, given as connected as they are to everything else, that it's likely they're going to want to connect the same way with government and with us in terms of solid waste issues. And that presents some challenges. For example, in the state of Florida, the legislature last year put forth legislation to require a nighttime meeting prior to the adoption of any rates. Is it unreasonable to expect that there may be a time in the future where these board meetings and these workshops are required to be more open, more interactive, and provide the opportunity for people who are outside the room to participate in the decision-making process? That's a big change, because I think we know, like with citing landfills, is a lot of times the things we do are unpopular, but the forces, the people that show up at the meeting are very few loud people. In the future, it's likely you're going to have more people engaged in a different way, and the challenge is to be able to message, to get information out there ahead of these things so that people truly understand what you're trying to do and the reasons for it. And that's a challenge for us. The challenge is to put information together, to put the facts out there, to put the story out there so that everyone understands why we're looking to add waste energy, why we're looking to modify our recycling programs, why we're looking to site a new landfill, or we need to, and to have a discussion about other opportunities and other alternatives to that. So it's both opportunities and it's challenges, but I think we do need to start working forward with in expectation that these types of changes are going to take place, and we're going to have to message in different ways and communicate in different ways than we do now.
Yes, and one of the things we all realize that this is an information world, and with the advent of Web 2.0 and social media, information moves fast and quick. And so when we're talking about digital citizens, and to your point about sharing positive, proactive information, why this is needed, we cannot be reactive as an industry. We must be proactive. We must be on the forefront of reshaping the narrative and the conversation around these key issues, because if we're not, they will be shaped for us. So how are we being proactive in that space to dialogue, to tell our own story as an industry about why this is important? So thank you. The next one, fiscal uncertainty. You can't see it, but this is basically a $100 bill with Band-Aids all over it. So I think that's just a very interesting visual. And Pat had some interesting thoughts around fiscal uncertainty and what that means to this industry.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. I think back, I've been married for over 3 decades now, and when I think about the early years when we were just starting our family, and I think about fiscal uncertainty, I recall that in those early years, there was a lot of month left at the end of the money, right? And even today, right, I think I'm able to make it stretch a little bit better, but my appetite for things is still bigger than my budget. And we think about the fiscal uncertainty that's facing local governments across the US. It's plaguing many of them. Many cities, many municipalities are strapped with debt. Some have filed for bankruptcy. Others still will. And you think about what's causing that, and you can perhaps look at poor planning or poor decision making, but on an increasing basis, I think what's happening are these outside forces pushing in, making it more and more difficult for the local governments, the local municipalities, to manage fiscal uncertainty. So what does that mean? I mean, you can look at macro issues of healthcare or pension systems or even just overall tax revenues, but if you boil it down to what does it mean for the regional recycling and solid waste systems that we're a part of, I think one thing is clear to me, particularly as I'm wrapping up my experience here at WASTECON and having benefited from exposure to this strategic foresight thinking, right? What's become clear to me is that we have to sharpen our skills on an immediate basis. I mean, this is not something we have time to think about. We've immediately got to engage in strategic foresight. We immediately have to begin rethinking what our systems are going to look like, and we need to cause the future versus having the future happen to us. And during Monday night's opening session, John Vander Ark made, I think, a very compelling case that called for a new business model. He pointed out that our infrastructure, which Carlton is so right, we need to invest in our infrastructure on an ongoing basis, right, in order to continue to achieve what we're setting out to do. And the President of the Republic made a compelling case that says it's time for a new business model, and I agree. But I would add something to that, and that is that the business model needs to synchronize not just the infrastructure, but the regional goals that it's intended to serve. So if the industry works independently and creates a new business model, and then King County goes and does the same, and the cities within King County goes and does the same, then I actually would predict things are going to get a lot worse. So instead, what I would present as the opportunity and the need, and really the call for action for us, is to bring all members of that supply chain to the table and to begin engaging in a very collaborative and a very strategic foresight approach to develop a new business model that is going to be fiscally sustainable in a volatile market, whether that's the stock market or the scrap metal market, but one that will serve our regional goals, because that's why these systems are intended to be in place to begin with. So I think it's an exciting opportunity, and it's going to be a very challenging one, and we shouldn't do it in silos. We should have everybody at the table.
You did such a great job segueing into the fourth one. The fourth one, city-to-city collaboration. And I want to pause real quick because there was a comment through Slido. Are you looking at solid waste issue impacts for rural or smaller communities? Example, who was involved in yesterday's discussion? And yes, that actually came up quite a bit. More in regard to how we respond to this and how these issues will impact cities versus, or not versus, but as compared to rural areas. And so that's part of the conversation, our response to this, and the impacts are going to be different on geographic factors, socioeconomic factors. So these are complex issues that aren't to say there's one solution for all. So for collaboration, Scott had some thoughts around what does that mean, what does that look like, and this might have been, we agreed, out of all of them, maybe the most positive one that we're doing, but that still has high impact and high certainty.
Yes, thank you. So I am lucky that I get to discuss the one thing I think that was positive and we felt like we were doing good now and will do well into the future. I think that is because it's typically looked at as a positive thing when you're working with the other communities around you. I know here in the Valley of the Sun, most of our residents really don't know a lot of times whether they're in Mesa or Gilbert or in Phoenix, because it's just boundaries that we've made ourselves, but for them, they're still here and they don't quite understand why things would be different. The other part of it is it takes away some of it limits the risk that we're taking. It's looked at positively, but it also, if you're able to share those financial infrastructure and technical knowledge amongst the cities, it makes it easier for us to move things forward. There's a couple of examples that I can give of things that we've done here locally. One of them is just, it was at a time in Mesa, we had a large storm event and a flood that just completely destroyed a couple of our neighborhoods, and we needed help from our neighboring communities as far as infrastructure from the solid waste standpoint and the cleanup. And we realized that it was very difficult for us to get some of these trucks, and so we worked together, put together an MOU, and now it's really easy for us to call up one of our neighboring cities and actually utilize some of their infrastructure and their trucks. And as a matter of fact, I had emails going this week. Well, if you were on a front load route today at the city of Mesa, there's a city of Phoenix truck that is out there working today within the city of Mesa. And so it allows us to share, I don't have to have as large of a spare ratio now because I know that there's some neighboring communities that will help us out, and the same, Mesa's willing to help others out in those ways. Another thing that we do is we partner with Arizona State University in a thing called the Sustainable Cities Network. It's a collaboration of most of the cities here in the Valley, the state, the county, and the university. And what we do is we share information in that group. And the whole idea when that was established, I was one of the first ones that was involved in the group. And the whole idea was if you've made a mistake before, let's talk about that. So let's not just talk about our successes. Let's talk about mistakes that we have made, and let's share those. And we kind of joke with each other. That way, we're not all going to make the same mistakes. And if you're going to make a mistake, go out there and make a new mistake, and then come back and tell everybody that mistake that you made so that we don't make that same mistake. But I think that's how you push that innovation. You're not going to be innovative. You're not going to push the envelope without making some mistakes. But there's no reason as cities that we should continue to make those same mistakes over and over again, learn from each other, and build off of that.
Excellent. So we have a couple of minutes left for this particular segment, either through Slido or there are 2 microphones. Please don't be scared. I've been up here all week. No one will bite you. No one will throw things at you. But we identified 4: infrastructure, digital citizens, fiscal uncertainty, city-to-city collaboration. What did we miss? Sir.
It is about thinking outside the box. Recycling industry, as we deal with it, is primarily some kind of container. Cans, bottles, boxes, etc., envelopes. So why not invite to be part of our discussions the American container industry? They would give us the view in the future. So if they are planning a new kind of container for ketchup or for hair conditioner, we know that it is coming. And we don't have the way to prevent the consumer from choosing that stuff that eventually will be discarded and be part of the waste stream.
Thank you. Gentlemen, anybody want to react to that? Ty.
Well, I would start from the standpoint that your phrase, think outside the box. And I think we've always been, every training we've been through, it's been think outside the box. And I would submit, based on our time with Rebecca Ryan and her speech here yesterday, the question is, the statement is no longer thinking outside the box, it's the acknowledgement that there is no box anymore. The boundaries are no longer set, the rules of engagement have changed. And if we don't change with that, and if we're not proactive in doing that, then we become reactive and we're reacting to what comes through the door, and therefore have no credibility or no innovation that comes with that.
Lauren, he's absolutely right with we need to be at the table at the beginning of the conversation and not at the end. Oftentimes, municipalities and waste industry professionals are forced to deal with the product issues after they're created. And that's a big challenge for us, not only from collections, but the disposal process as well. We need to know what these materials are being made of, how can we best dispose of them, and what practical use we can do to reuse them as either an energy or another product.
You mean we need to talk to other industries about what's going on? We need to have conversations, right? Shocker.
Absolutely.
What else? What did we miss? Microphone. Anybody, there's something burning, right? So this is over the next year. Oh, yes, I love it at the same time. We'll go here, he beat you, and Bob afterwards. Go ahead.
To springboard off this last comment, I think one of the important parts is not only our partners in other industries, but our partners in the regulatory community. I mean, we need to pull them out of the kicking and streaming out of 1978, which a lot of these packaging, medical, safety requirements have been built or based in the bedrock, and look forward to that next 30 or 50 years or whatever it is. As long as we have those guiding principles as the anchor, we're never going to get enough critical mass moving forward fast enough to meet these needs.
Well, speaking of partners, the conversation you were having about infrastructure, I was interested in each of your perspectives on public-private partnerships, ways in which to leverage funding from the private sector, as well as different ways to deliver projects in a more efficient way.
I'll start and then pass it over to my colleagues.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things that we worked on in the city of Philadelphia with our last waste contract was to create a provision for us to work on a waste-to-energy initiative with a public-private venture. And the goal was ultimately to try to build an anaerobic digester to be able to take food waste out of the city's waste stream. In the residential sector, it's about 30% of all the entire waste stream. And without it, we don't think we can get to zero waste. And so the idea is to have that private partnership invest in the city of Philadelphia, either through building a facility and we pay it off through avoided disposal costs over a period of time, and ultimately be able to reduce the amount of waste that we send to landfills and traditional WTEs.
Anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I'll add something there. At the Solid Waste Authority in Palm Beach County, we don't have what is a modern public-private partnership scenario, but we do own the facilities and we hire private operators to operate them. The one thing we've always said is that, you know, as a governmental entity, we don't do venture capital and we're not in the risk-taking business. So with these innovative technologies that are coming forward, many of them may not be fully operational, fully tested today. They're truly innovative. Those public-private partnerships are essential to ensure that risk is properly allocated and that our citizens are not adversely affected by any bad decisions that we might make. So it's important that the parties coming to the table with the technology actually have skin in the game and are rewarded for that as well. So it's a risk-reward allocation. I think it's essential.
Excellent. So I know there's so many thoughts. Pat, can you real few? Okay. Renaud, go ahead, fast.
Yeah, well, a quick example in King County, we've got a large public-private partnership that allows us to, we've captured the landfill gas as long as we've been operating that facility. It's about 1 million tons a year, but through public-private partnership, we're now purifying and removing the bad elements of that molecule and producing clean natural gas, putting it in a pipeline, and enough to heat over 15,000 homes a year. That's a big example of a public-private partnership, but there's a lot of small examples that we deploy regularly. We have grant funding that we're constantly making available to encourage experimental projects in King County to help us discover what's next, even on a small scale, to continue to kind of push the boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hello. First off, I'd like to thank all of you for being here, because what it gives us the perspective is that there's enough leadership that is not just one local municipality, but those that are nationwide, and we really need that. I have about 500 things I'd love to talk to you about, because I'm rather passionate about this. But one of the things that I get back as far as from the public is clarity, the need for clarity. We have so many waste streams that need to be responsibly dealt with. Even post-consumer recycling, we have compostable packaging, we have food waste, we have plastic recycling, we have a few different plastic recyclings. And then we have, of course, what is left over, which is solid waste. So if we could get some consensus and some clarity as to how these products are each going to be individually processed down the road in a way that is going to be environmentally, socially, and financially conscious. Because we have to have a balance. We have to be able to use packaging, use products, and then dispose of them safely in such a way that it doesn't destroy everything around it. So we can't really throw the baby out with the bathwater, but at the same time, there's enough innovation, there's enough regulation that can bring consensus and make a positive future for these disposal methods. I'll give you a quick example. There's with regulation and some of the ordinances that come down, there's quite a bit of conflict. So we're a private small hauler. So when these regulations come to us and we're told exactly how we're supposed to do this, there's a lot of conflict. So we have a little bit of authority to manage that conflict and say, okay, we're going to take this down to the bare minimums so that when it does come forward, it's at least going to be in compliance. But if you attend some of these webinars where technology and the capture of emissions in California could be used in such a way as to boost energy that would run cities full of energy. And because of a word, emission, it is not allowed, because all emissions are considered harmful. So as the leaders of some of these municipalities and some of these ordinances, and you have constituents that are giving feedback into how these laws are going to be fit, please help us. Please clear up some of the verbiage and the conflict that is in these laws so that we can give good information to the consumer so they know what type of decisions they can make when they purchase and who they're going to purchase and where their byproduct of their waste is going to go down the line.
Thank you. Oh, she got a round of applause for that one. Excellent. So that was actually a wonderful segue into, we spent some time talking about, so these are the issues, but what do we do about it? Right? These are complex issues. These are not going to be solved over the next year, but we're going to begin to have the conversation. And we came up with 4 different things that we think, as an industry, we need to be proactive about. And what you were speaking to was we need to think holistically. We need to consider larger, bigger, outside of our bubble. And Ty, I know you felt strongly about this one, so please share your insights.
Thanks, Katie. Well, again, just to review our time with Rebecca yesterday, we first spent trying to determine what issues were going to be coming down the pike, and what those issues, what ones had a significant impact on our industry. And the third question was, are we prepared to deal with that? And the answer that came back, which Tom articulated, was we're not prepared, we're not ready. And I think some of that comes through because most of these issues that Katie is reviewing are not really controllable issues. They're out of our control. And because they're out of our control, the natural reflex then is to just wait till something happens. In other words, to be reactive. And the point is, even though they're out of our control, maybe, that doesn't mean that we don't have influence on the outcomes and how they affect us and our industry. And trying to have that influence is what is the proactive approach to it. Think about if you were you were a captain on a ship out in the sea and a storm was coming. You don't control that storm's trajectory, its strength, or anything else. But as the captain of the ship, you do have influence in terms of how you deal with that storm to get through safe passage. To be able to do that requires a holistic view. You've got to see all the parts and how they come together, and you just can't look at them individually. When you go back to that ship on the captain of the ship, he doesn't look and say, oh, that looks like a clear sea over there. No, there's so many other components that make up the whole of that decision. What does it look like? What's the radar say? What's my data say? What's my fuel gauge? And what impact is this going to have on my passengers, which is the customer, which is ultimately important? So to be able to do that, you've got to think holistically. You've got to look at all the parts. And so that was one of the points that we came out of this time with Rebecca is with all these issues, and with all these issues that are going to impact us, we have to look at it from all aspects, which in turn evokes creative thinking, which leads to innovative solutions.
Yes, thank you. And I want to also tie in, as we can, your comments through Slido. And so along with thinking holistically, there is a comment that says, what are some good ideas embraced by other countries that we should consider in order to be more innovative? So when we're talking about thinking holistically, that is such a large, huge concept. There are many different ways that you can do that, but considering our international peers, what are they doing that we could begin to adopt? So thanks for that. The next one that we had, this is going to seem, I don't know, maybe cliche, but it's something that we need to do and need to consider. And one of the next points was we need to work harder, smarter, and faster. Great, thanks. Harder, smarter, faster. And so, Scott, I know that you also felt passionately about this. So please tell the audience how they need to work smarter, harder, faster.
Yes. Okay, and I don't think it necessarily means we all have to work 60, 80 hours a week from a harder standpoint, but I think it really builds on kind of that city-to-city thing I talked about also is, you know, you can leverage the resources that we have, and with that, automatically your influence that you have is going to increase. You know, one of the examples that was used, or an analogy that was used too, is we're going to be reactive. So we anticipate things that are happening, but we don't know exactly how it's going to happen. And so we're going to have to be reactive. And one of the analogies that was used was a sports analogy. I coach baseball for my boys. And when we're teaching them to play defense, you don't play defense in baseball by sitting back on your heels and waiting for the ball to come to you and then thinking, what am I going to do when the ball comes to you? We teach our boys in between pitches, you know, you're thinking where are the base runners, if the ball goes here, the ball goes there, this is what I'm doing. You have to think about it beforehand. In addition to that, we call it a pre-pitch. You move forward, you're on your toes, and you're moving forward, you're ready to attack. Okay, defense is not played by moving backwards and trying to avoid things. You're moving forward and you're attacking. And I think that's what we're gonna have to realize that we do. We see things on the horizon that we know that are going to come, but we don't know exactly how that's going to happen. And I'll be honest, I think with what happened with recycling and with China, I don't think anybody in the room can really look in a mirror and say, I had no idea that this was going to come and that this was going to happen. But we weren't as prepared as we should have been within the city of Mesa to deal with what actually did happen when it did. And so I think what we need to do is realize you'll see into the future of what's coming, but we need to go through those scenarios in our minds and take time, which is one of the things that we learned here, take the time to think about, okay, if this happens, how are we going to react? Where are our strengths? Where are our weaknesses? And how are we able to leverage those strengths and limit those weaknesses that we have?
Thanks. A lot of the comments here, and even in the audience, but one of the, well, contributing to one of the things that we talked about yesterday as a solution, what we can do about it, is collaboration. We've used that so many different ways, but I'm interested in Tom's perspective as to what additional insights we talked about. What does that mean, and how can we collaborate to solve? And
actually, Pat touched on it a little bit earlier. You know, one of the mantras that I've used in working with my teams, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And you talk about collaboration. Within our industry today, I don't think there's ever been a time where there's been a greater need for collaboration to go far. And so the push to getting working groups together, to have dialogues like this, I can tell you from my experience talking to my colleagues here in the workshops yesterday, were very enlightening and important. And it's good to hear the pains of others. But the need for us to get together and actually work towards solution, share best practices, share the failures. I think one of the challenges when you talk about collaboration is building trust, right? You're gonna have to have trust. And that also means sharing the failures as well as the successes. But when you're dealing, you know, in a highly competitive environment at times, not everybody wants to share their failures. So the importance of building that trust and to collaborate needs to be established. And it's going to take time. But quite frankly, I don't think we have that much time to build the trust. So in as much as we can have you know, meetings, roundtables, discussions, forums like this, so we can share this information, I think is extremely important. Because we have the public sector and the private sector that are both working together, and we have competing priorities, we have different goals, right? And so how do we get them to align in order to go further? Historically, the industry has pushed to go faster, and so it's these one-offs and everybody trying to go about it themselves, and then everyone's looking around the table just to see how far one's gotten in front of the other through this process. But I believe the collective efforts of everyone in establishing that trust and collaboration, I think would definitely push us much further along than we are today.
You said two interesting things that struck me. I mean, you said a lot more interesting things than struck me, but two that I'm going to point out. One is that, so we just talked about, Scott talked about working harder, faster, but there's also the long game. And so there's this continuous tension of how do we balance being more than reactive, being proactive, and so therefore we need to move quickly and thoughtfully. But then also at the same time, we can't rush into it. Collaboration takes time. And our vision, while we were talking about 10 years, we also have to look at the long game. And so there is no right or wrong, but how do we continue to work through this tension of being quick on our feet, but also having that long vision and not being short-sighted in the impacts coming down the road. The other thing that struck me was the fact that when we're talking about collaboration and putting in the time, you know, you're working faster and you're working harder, but these things take time and take intention. And I know, Carlton, you felt strongly when we were talking that as an industry and as peers, we need to commit to this. So can you share about that?
Sure. One of the things that someone once said is the only thing that's constant is change. And we have to start being prepared that the industry is certainly going to change again, and we need to start preparing now for that change. And you're starting to see it in actions like climate change. We're being pressed to do different things, cheaper, cleaner fuel. We want to make sure that we reduce our carbon footprint. We should need to start developing action plans to address those changes that are coming in the future. So that's requiring putting in a lot of work. That means that we have to start looking at the demographics, population trends. Look what our cities and our rural counties are going to look like in the future and how much waste they're going to generate. Not only how much waste they're going to generate, what types of waste, what types of products are on our horizon. All of those things are going to help and start shaping how the industry responds to that. And the more you start in advanced planning, the stronger the outcome. So I think that's extremely important. Harvey Gresham laid it out very well on Monday during his presentation. He kind of gave us a timeline of how things evolved from the 70s to where we are today. And if you take that same timeline and push it 30 years out or 20 years out, we need to start looking at how we're going to be able to respond to whatever those changes in the industry are.
Yes, and trying to tie this all together, there is a story behind this, and Tom had mentioned, and Carlton, you had touched upon it, as we also can't forget the engagement of citizens, right? This is one of the top 4. Dr. May talked about earlier this week telling the story, and Tom, you were talking about sharing our failures, our challenges requires vulnerability, and that's a key element, if you remember, that Dr. May talked about in storytelling. And so you might have been sitting there and what the heck does telling a story have anything to do with my job or this industry? We have an important responsibility when we're talking about this long vision, 10, 15 years out, and we're trying to address these huge issues that are really heady for the general public to understand. It's hard for us to conceptualize and have conversations and understanding what's happening in a very complex industry. And now we're trying to communicate that and engage citizens in the future, help them to understand the criticality of all of these elements. We have to be intentional and gifted with telling that story in a way that the people we serve can understand. So don't underestimate the power of these things. Be mindful through the process. But it takes all of these things coming together for us to think in that holistic way. So we have about 5 minutes left, and before we close it, I want to give you all an opportunity. If there's somebody who felt we missed something, you want to share an insight, this is a conversation amongst peers. So I want to invite you, if there's something that you feel strongly about, please, microphones, Slido, and gentlemen, there's some interesting questions beforehand, if any of those stick out to you. Anyone have thoughts that you would like to share?
I did want to add something. When we talk about, when you brought up vulnerability, part of the exercise yesterday, as we were going through our cards and having discussions, and one of the things that came up is that earlier on, we discussed biases, right? Based on where we're located, based on infrastructure, based on regulations. And understanding that when we have dialogue and when we meet with somebody, understanding that we actually had to stop and listen to the other person and to hear where they're coming from. And I think realizing our own, I'll say personal bias because of where we're located, became very prevalent through that dialogue. And at the point in which the clock was ticking down, people started setting aside their biases to actually have the dialogue to make a determination, where should this card go? So when we talk about collaboration and working together, I think Rebecca hit on being able to understand where our biases are. And I think part of that exercise yesterday was, personally for me, it was enlightening because I didn't think I had any bias, but I found out I did. It's sort of biased towards California, sorry, but I got over it. I got past it. So
We're glad you got over your biases. We appreciate that.
it was therapy.
Therapy. Anyone from the audience truly have anything? This is the time and opportunity, right? Because over the next year, SWANA is going to be working on serving the membership in these spaces. So if there is something that you want to speak to, now is your time. Seize the opportunity. Oh, good. Long enough to get up. Thank you, Joe.
Good. Thank you. We were talking today about collaboration. Very often on the one level, on the state to state, city to city, things like that. Yesterday, I had a very interesting session talking about emissions from landfills and things like that, and there's all sorts of regulation. I think there was 000XXX, Quad 4, and all these things I really don't know about too much, but it's very interesting. And one question was asked for all the people at the session, how clear is all this stuff? And the answer that came out with 82% was clear as mud. So, what do we look at that? You said a few minutes ago, look internationally as well. If you look at, for example, Germany, they have a landfill ordinance from the Fed on down. That has to work that way. And if you look at maybe internationally,
How can we put that here? Can something come from the feds saying across USA, across North America, we have to do it this way? You see in California a lot, SB 1383, I think is the number, doing very interesting things there. Does that happen in Massachusetts? Does that happen in New Hampshire? Different places, different ways of looking at it, clear as mud, what I learned yesterday. Is there ways to bring it, looking from the international side and the feds, bringing it down so there's one level playing field for all states and all entities, all companies to work with? That would interest me from the SWAN if we can also go this way. Thank you.
Thank you. 10 seconds. Anyone want to react to that? Respond to that?
I'll try. Yes, the European model is a heavy tax on landfilling, and I think that has had a dramatic effect. The likelihood of whether the feds would pass anything like that, that's difficult to say, but what I will say, it's our responsibility to act locally, to do the best we can in our local communities to manage the waste that is generated within those communities as much inside that community as possible. So if you're taking responsibility for the waste your community generates, either by heavy recycling programs, recovering metals, anything you can do to divert waste from landfill, that's what needs to be done. And the more people who do that locally, the more likely it is that that's going to expand nationwide, and we will reduce our reliance on landfilling over time. We absolutely have to, because that's what the public is demanding.
Scott, 10 seconds.
Okay. I think it's going to be difficult right now in the United States to get more regulation. We talked about tribalism that's associated right now in our politics, and so getting agreement is difficult, and I agree. I think it's going to have to happen more on a local level. And I think with cities, you have to do it in a way that is safe and efficient and is fiscally responsible. And if you can do those things, if you can tell somebody, if I can tell an elected official it's the right thing to do and we're going to save money doing it, it's very difficult to argue with that. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. If it's the right thing to do and it saves money, Intel talked about it earlier, you can have that conversation all day with pretty much anybody in the room and they're going to agree with you.
So we're going to do 2 more things, then we're going to wrap it up. I do want to I'm going to read this slowly, the bottom question, to give you a chance, all the panel, to think about it. So it says, as leaders, because I think this is an excellent question, as leaders in your organization, and I want you all to think about this as well, and how you would answer this, how do you plan to communicate these 4 issues, these 4 topics, back to your staff, and how will you inspire innovation and collaboration in your own organizations to address these 4 issues? So I'll read it again to give you all a chance to think, so that then we can go through, and I'm going to give you 10 seconds.
I was going to say.
Oh, are you ready to go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I sent an email this morning. No, just kidding.
Oh.
In regards to the communications with my team, we do take a collaborative approach. We try and break down the walls. We're very inclusive. We include not only our teams to talk about the challenges that we face for operations, lack of infrastructure, but we also include partnering cities, the haulers, and other stakeholders to have that dialogue. So a part of this, part of the takeaway for me is actually to have a little bit more in-depth conversation, not only with my team, the cities that we work with, city managers, elected officials, and key stakeholders, but to share a lot of the information that we take from events like this. And not only based on the challenges and needs, but actually some of the skills building opportunity for our teams. So there's an interactive process, and it's not just an email, I promise.
That might be just the starting point.
Yeah.
Starting point.
But there's a lot of dialogue and discussion that goes on. Plus, I have about 5 managers here that they're actually going to, if you're out there, get ready for your report out when you get back. So.
All right, we'll do Ty. You want to take this one, and then we'll turn to this gentleman.
Just to me, I like the question, but I go back. This is my first SWANA WASTECON. Hadn't been here before, primarily because the date never worked for me, but when I looked at the agenda, there wasn't necessarily a value-driven agenda for me. And when I saw this agenda, to me it was purposeful in terms of how it was put together, in terms of really helping us build skill sets that are so critical for the future. The storytelling segment was really about effective communication. If we cannot be effective communicators, we might as well forget it, because we'll get rolled over. The second one was about the mindfulness, which is really techniques to help us all be better leaders. It's one example of that we can take back and really do with our team. And the third is looking at the future, which to me was really about trying to be more proactive rather than reactive. So when I go back, these are points that we discuss in our team meetings as well. We'll blend in the substance of a lot of these talks, but to me, that was the value proposition of this conference, and I really like how this last segment about the future is really going to build into future conferences and what kind of training we have and all the other value propositions that a trade association brings to us as members.
Little did Ty know, he just auditioned to be the MC for the next conference. He just weaved everything together so well.
You're MC permanently.
Oh, okay, thank you. This gentleman has been very patient, so I'm going to let him go and then we'll wrap up. Sir, please.
Well, this is to congratulate the persons who brought to the trade show downstairs the circular MRF. I think that there is a very brilliant idea. I'm a mathematician by training. So my perspective is the linear MRF is a one-way only way to deal with the stream that gets in the entry stage. So our recovery rate is limited by the processing speed. The circular MRF allows to increase the capture rate and at the same time have a better understanding of the way that the public uses the service, because we don't have just residue. We are even able to figure out what goes in the residue, and those two issues are essential for the financial health of any recycling program. So I would like to see sometime in the future an evaluation of any MRF that goes that way with the circular processing. Thank you. And congratulations to everyone who worked really hard to make this conference happen.
Oh, thank you. Give him a round of applause. So the benefit of being the CEO of SWANA is even if I say we'll take one last question, David Biederman stands up. Yes, sir, please take the microphone.
So I'm not here to ask a question. First of all, Ty, I really appreciated your comments because that's really what we tried to do. And the fact that you're here and those positive feedback is very reflective of what we're trying to do. So thank you for that. And thank you to all the panelists. But speaking of round of applause, I want to recognize Katie Sandoe for the amazing job she's done as the weaver here. So can we give her a round of applause, please?
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
You all have been absolutely fabulous to navigate this conference with. And I just think that's a great way to enter this panel session. So as these gentlemen exit, can we give them a round of applause, please? Thank you, gentlemen, very much. All right, folks, this is the sad ending of our time together. We're coming to an end. You go home, you go back to your lives and the busyness of what is ahead. And apparently there's some sort of exciting thing happening out in the lobby. I know you want to reach to it too. So thank you for your time. It has been my honor. It has been a privilege to navigate this conference with you. But this conversation is going to continue through the next year, and we're going to pick it back up in WASTECON 2020. Yes, I said it. We're talking about WASTECON 2020. It will be in sunny, warm Dallas, which is a great place to go. I'm on the East Coast. Go to Warmth during the first week of December. It's on the screen, where we're going to talking about embracing disruption. So part of having Rebecca come and end the conference talking about this conversation is that these are disruptions that are inevitably coming down the line. And so what are we going to do as an industry to address it? How will we embrace that disruption? So, whatever lays before you for the rest of the day and this week, I wish you safe travels. I hope that you live intentionally, that whatever reality you want, you create it, and that you embrace discomfort, disruptions, and make the most. So, safe travels. Thank you all very much.